My son-in-law told his colleagues I was a retired janitor who still called him for money every Christmas. He said it at my granddaughter's 6th birthday party, loud enough that I heard it from the kitchen where I was cutting the cake. I'm Gerald Hutchins, 67 years old, and I spent the last 14 years letting my daughter believe her father was a man who got by on a pension and some odd handyman work around the neighborhood. What my daughter Suzanne never knew was that the little property maintenance company I'd mentioned once, maybe twice, over Sunday dinners had become Hutchins Building Services, a commercial facilities management company operating across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, with contracts worth just under $94 million annually and over 2,000 employees on the payroll. When her husband Kevin sat me down in my own living room last February to explain why it would be financially sensible for everyone if I signed the house over to them now, before things got complicated, I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded, said I'd think about it, and then made 3 phone calls the following morning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Most people see exactly what Kevin sees when they look at me. A man in his late 60s who drives a 2006 Silverado with rust along the wheel wells and a crack in the passenger side mirror I've been meaning to fix since Trudeau's first term. Someone who wears Carhartt jackets and buys his work boots at Mark's. I bring a 2-4 of Molson to every family gathering and always arrive 15 minutes early because I grew up in a house where being late was considered a character flaw. Kevin Marsh, 36 years old, financial analyst at a Bay Street firm in Toronto, 6-figure salary, drives a leased Audi, and has corrected my pronunciation of quinoa at the dinner table no fewer than 4 times. Suzanne is 34. She works in corporate communications at a firm downtown, sharp as anyone I've ever met, and somewhere in the last decade of marriage to Kevin, she started seeing her father through his eyes. I don't blame her entirely. That's what love does to people sometimes. It adjusts your vision without you noticing. The first sign came 18 months ago at Thanksgiving. Kevin started referring to my house as the Etobicoke property in conversations with his parents. Not my dad's house, not even Grandpa's place. The Etobicoke property. His mother, Francine, would nod like this was the reasonable adult way to refer to a home a man had lived in for 26 years. His father, Douglas, who sold a chain of dental clinics in 2017 and has been living off that sale while quietly acting like he invented compound interest, started dropping comments about property tax reform in Toronto and how older homes in that corridor were becoming more liability than asset. The second sign was when Kevin brought his friend over, a real estate agent named someone I'd never met, who walked through my house on a Saturday afternoon in October while I was watching the Leafs game in the living room. The fellow actually opened the coat closet in the front hall while I was sitting 6 feet away. Kevin introduced him as someone who had some thoughts about the place. When I asked what kind of thoughts, Kevin said smoothly that they were just trying to help me understand my options going forward. My options. In the house I'd paid off in full by 2004. What none of them knew was that every Wednesday I drove that rusted Silverado to our head office in Mississauga, where 61 people reported directly to me. What none of them knew was that the cleaning supplies stacked in my garage, the ones Kevin had once suggested I donate because they looked cluttered, were prototype samples from a specialty division developing biodegradable industrial solvents now under contract with 4 major hospital networks across the country, including 3 in Ontario. What none of them knew was that I had a standing Tuesday lunch with my CFO and a board meeting every 2nd month at an office building on Airport Road that my company had owned outright since 2019. But the moment that actually changed things wasn't Kevin's friend measuring my hallway or Douglas's comments at Thanksgiving. It was a Sunday dinner in late January. Kevin's parents had been invited. This was, I was told, a family financial discussion. I made roast chicken. I always make roast chicken on Sundays. Francine walked in, looked at my kitchen, and said without pausing that the countertops were original and that must make resale complicated. Douglas shook my hand, glanced at the living room ceiling, and told me he'd noticed some discoloration near the light fixture. That was probably a slow leak from the bathroom above. There was no leak. There had never been a leak. I built that addition in 2001, and I've inspected every inch of that ceiling myself. Kevin sat across from me with his laptop open. Suzanne was quiet in the way she gets when she's decided something but isn't ready to say it out loud yet. Douglas leaned forward and began talking about the Toronto real estate market, the way people talk about weather. Like it was something that happened to you regardless of what you wanted. He talked about detached homes in Etobicoke, about how the values were peaking, about how a lot of older homeowners were sitting on equity they couldn't access without selling. I asked him what that had to do with me. He looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at Suzanne. Suzanne looked at the table. Dad, Kevin said, "We've been doing some thinking. The house is worth somewhere between $800 and $850 right now, maybe more. And we know things have been tight. Things haven't been tight." He continued as if I hadn't spoken. "With your CPP and whatever you got in savings, the maintenance on a place this size has to be a stretch. Property taxes alone," he paused to pull up something on his laptop, "are over $9,000 a year. I know what my property taxes are." Francine touched my arm with the practiced gentleness of someone who had once taken a conflict resolution seminar. "Gerald, nobody's trying to pressure you. We're trying to think ahead. That's all." Douglas said there was a very nice seniors community in Oakville. Independent living. A friend of his had moved in and loved it. Monthly fees in the range of $2,200. They had a woodworking shop, he said, as though that would be the detail that got me across the line. I'm 67 years old. I still cross-country ski at Hardwood Hills every February. I renovated my own basement last spring. And this man was selling me a woodworking shop. Kevin cleared his throat. "What we're proposing, and I want to be clear that this comes from a place of care, is a family transfer of the property. You'd sign the deed over to Suzanne and me. We'd give you a legal right of residence in the secondary suite downstairs for as long as you need it. That gives you stability, removes the financial burden, and keeps the property in the family." The secondary suite. The one I'd built with my own hands as a rental unit in 2008. The one that had paid for Suzanne's tuition at Western. "And where would I go after that?" I asked. Kevin had an answer ready. "There's a retirement community in Burlington that looks incredible. One-bedroom unit starting around $2,100 a month. Very well reviewed, close to the lake." Douglas nodded. "You'd still have the proceeds from the sale. We'd pay you fair market value minus a family discount, so let's say $650, and with your pension that should be perfectly manageable. $650,000 for a home worth $850, a 23% family discount." I held my coffee cup with both hands and said I would think about it. Suzanne looked relieved. She thought that meant yes. That night I sat at the kitchen table where I'd helped her with her grade 11 chemistry homework, and I thought about the woman my daughter had become. Not bad, not cruel, not really. Just a person who had spent enough years inside someone else's framework that she'd started mistaking it for her own. I thought about Kevin, who was not an evil man but who had never once asked me what I did on Wednesdays. The documents arrived 10 days later by courier. Professional letterhead. The covering letter was written by Douglas's brother-in-law, who practiced real estate law in Mississauga. The language was warm and clinical at the same time. Voluntary property transition. Family asset stewardship. Dignified equity release. I read it twice at the kitchen table. There was a timeline. I had 30 days to sign, after which they would explore available legal mechanisms to protect the family's long-term interests in the property. Legal mechanisms. In a home I'd owned for 26 years without a single missed payment, I walked down the hall to the back bedroom that I've used as an office since Suzanne left for university, the one Kevin thought held old tax files. I opened the filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched since my wife passed 6 years ago. Inside was a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for Hutchins Building Services, dated 2009. Financial statements from the last fiscal year showing annual revenue of $94 million. A letter from RBC confirming liquid holdings across business and personal accounts. A Canadian business feature from 3 years ago that had called me one of the quieter architects of the facilities management industry in English Canada. I sat with those documents for about 20 minutes. Then I picked up the phone. First call. My corporate lawyer, a woman named, I've worked with her for 11 years, picked up on the second ring. Gerald, she said immediately. What's wrong? I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. I need 3 things, I told her. First, I need the house transferred into a family trust effective immediately, structured so that no external party has any claim on it. Second, I need documentation of my actual financial position prepared in a format that can be read in a room. Third, I need it all done before the weekend. She said, consider it done. Second call. My CFO, a steady man from Brampton I've trusted for 9 years. I need you to pull every active contract we hold with any entity connected to the Marsh family, or Douglas Holt. Douglas Holt was Kevin's father's name. Give me whatever you have. He called back in 40 minutes. Gerald, we have 2. Marsh Financial Consulting, that's Kevin's firm. They're a subcontractor on 2 of our corporate campus accounts in North York. Combined value, about $280,000 annually. And Holt Dental Group. Douglas sold his clinics but retained a management company that does consulting for 3 dental chains we service in the GTA. That's another $140,000 a year. Terminate both contracts, I said. 30 days notice as required. No renewal. Gerald, Kevin's firm is going to notice that. That's the point. Third call was to my operations manager. I needed her to verify one thing. Kevin had been telling people for months about a major infrastructure project his firm had landed, a long-term financial modeling contract for a new mixed-use development in Hamilton. He'd mentioned it at Christmas like it was the thing that would define his career. I'd smiled and passed the potatoes. She confirmed it within the hour. The development company building that Hamilton project was a client of ours, not a small one. We held the facilities management contract for their existing properties in Stony Creek and Ancaster. 6 buildings. Our contact there knew me personally. I called him directly. He was surprised to hear from me. I told him we were doing a strategic review of our Hamilton area portfolio, and I wanted to discuss our service agreement. We talked for 20 minutes. By the end of it, he had a clearer picture of our value to his organization. He also had, gently, a slightly different impression of the financial consulting firm his development company had recently retained. I didn't ask him to do anything. I just gave him accurate information. What he did with it was his business. The dinner party was Francine's idea. A celebration, she called it. Suzanne and Kevin's 12th anniversary, combined with a belated birthday for Kevin that had apparently been postponed. 40 guests. A private room at a restaurant in Yorkville that I recognized from a magazine Suzanne had left at my house in December. The kind of place with a tasting menu and no prices on the menu. I wore a clean flannel shirt and dark jeans. I drove the Silverado and parked it between a Tesla and a Range Rover on Hazleton Avenue. Kevin met me at the door in a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. Inside, the room smelled like money trying to smell like warmth. Douglas and Francine had arrived early and were already managing the room, greeting people, directing conversations, the way people do when they've decided the event is partly theirs. Douglas spotted me from across the room and waved me over with the expansive gesture of a man who considers himself generous. He steered me toward a cluster of Kevin's colleagues. Gerald, he said, this is James. He's in commercial lending. This is Priya. She heads a hedge fund downtown. And this is Martin, who does private equity out of Calgary. Everyone, this is Suzanne's dad. Gerald. They shook my hand with professional courtesy. The kind you give a guest's elderly relative. Martin asked what I did. I said I was semi-retired, used to be in building maintenance. Douglas laughed. Gerald's a handy guy. Used to run a cleaning operation, industrial side of things. I didn't correct him. Kevin appeared with a glass of wine, which he handed to Douglas. I got a water, which Francine delivered with a small smile. Gerald doesn't drink much, she explained to Priya, watching the budget. I took the water. The conversation moved around me the way these things do. Cottage country, school admissions, the housing market. Kevin mentioned the Hamilton project twice in 20 minutes. The second time, Martin looked faintly distracted, like a man checking a thought he'd had earlier. Francine tapped her glass. Everyone, I want to say a few words. She looked at Suzanne and Kevin with a performance of tenderness that I had seen enough times to know was real and calculated in equal measure. Kevin and Suzanne have given us so much joy, she began. And now they're taking the next step, building their future, a forever home for their family right here in Toronto. She looked at me with a smile that arrived a beat too late, and we're so grateful to Gerald for making that possible, for understanding that family looks after family, for graciously agreeing to help the next generation build something lasting. She raised her glass. To family. 40 people raised their glasses. Several of them looked at me, waiting for me to nod or smile or confirm the gift they'd just been told I was giving. I hadn't agreed to anything. Kevin stepped forward. He put a hand on my shoulder. Dad, we want to say thank you, publicly. What you're doing means everything to us. I looked around the room. 40 people who had spent the evening speaking about my house, my finances, and my future as though they were managing a file. I have a question, I said. Not loud. But the room shifted. Kevin, do you know who holds the facilities management contract for the Holt Dental Group Management Company? He frowned. What? Dad, this isn't... Do you know who services the commercial accounts for your firm's North York clients? The ones on Shepherd? Kevin's face changed. Gerald, Francine said carefully, I'll tell you. The company that services those accounts is called Hutchins Building Services. Kevin, have you heard that name? Silence. Hutchins Building Services Incorporated in Ontario in 2009. Currently operating in 3 provinces. I pulled out my phone and opened the company dashboard. Revenue for today, across all active facilities, $112,000. Active contracts, 2,041. Total employees, 2,073. Priya was looking at me with an entirely different expression. Kevin laughed, short and uncomfortable. Dad, what is this? It's my company. I founded it. I'm still the CEO. Kevin's colleagues had gone very still. Douglas had a look on his face that I hadn't seen before, the look of a man recalculating. You drive a truck from 2006, he said. Yes, it still runs. I don't see the relevance. Francine said that can't be. Current company valuation is approximately $94 million. Personal net worth, including real estate holdings in Collingwood and Prince Edward County, along with liquid assets, is roughly $108 million. I paused. The house you've been planning to buy for me for $650 is held in a family trust as of 3 days ago. No external party has any legal claim to it. Your 30-day letter had no legal standing regardless, but I wanted to be tidy about it. Douglas's face had gone the color of old snow. Kevin stepped toward me. Dad, let's go somewhere private, and the third thing, I continued, the Hamilton Development Project. The one you've been building your professional reputation on this year. The one you told Lucas's daycare teacher was going to be the biggest thing you'd ever done. Kevin stopped. The development company retained me last week for a strategic facilities consultation. As part of that conversation, I provided them with a full picture of the vendors and consultants involved in their project. They've asked some questions of their own financial advisors about the modeling work your firm has been contracted to deliver. Martin, who was still across the room, already had his phone in his hand. Kevin said nothing. You had your father-in-law's lawyer draft documents threatening legal action against a 67-year-old man, I said, in his own home. You announced publicly tonight a decision I never made. You called me a burden to people I've never met. You and your father-in-law decided together that I was a problem to be managed, an asset to be transferred, a line item in your decade plan. You never once asked me what I did on Wednesdays." He sat down into a chair as though his legs had gone soft. Suzanne hadn't moved since I'd started speaking. She was standing near the bar with both hands around her wine glass, and the look on her face was something I hadn't seen in years. She looked 22. She looked like the girl who used to call me from her dorm room when she couldn't sleep. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. The house was built with money I earned and maintained with work I did myself. It belongs to me. That's not a negotiation. He put his head down. Dad, I'm sorry. Wait. He looked up. How long have you known about the company? 14 years. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I walked out into the cold. It was February in Toronto, and there was fresh snow on the Hazelton sidewalk. I scraped the Silverado's windshield by hand because the defrost on the driver's side has been slow since last winter, and I drove home on the Gardner with the radio off. Suzanne called at 11:30 that night. I let it ring. She called again at midnight. I picked up. Dead. I know. I didn't know about any of it, she said. The letter, the documents, his lawyer. I swear I didn't know it had gone that far. You knew about the property, Suzanne. She was quiet. Yes, I knew about that part. We stayed on the phone without talking for a moment. It's a thing we've always been able to do. I love you, she said finally. I know that too. The weeks after were difficult in the way that necessary things often are. Kevin's firm lost both service contracts. The 90-day notice had been filed, and the accounts moved to other providers. The Hamilton project restructured its consulting arrangements after the development company completed its own review. Kevin was reassigned internally, not dismissed but moved sideways, to accounts that were smaller and less visible. He understood what it meant. Douglas stopped calling. Francine sent a card that was polite and confused at the same time, which I thought was probably the most honest thing she'd ever sent me. On a Saturday morning in late March, Suzanne showed up at my door alone. She was wearing an old university sweatshirt and no makeup, which meant she hadn't been planning to come, had just gotten in the car and driven. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table and she talked for a long time. About Kevin. About the years she'd spent quietly revising her image of me to match what he believed. About the slow erosion that happens in a marriage when one person's certainties start to fill all the available space. Kevin came the following Saturday. He looked tired in a specific way I recognized. The tiredness of a man who had been doing a lot of honest thinking. He sat across from me and didn't say anything clever or prepared. He just said he'd been wrong. Not about one thing. About the way he'd been looking at the world for a long time. I told him about the early years, about building the company out of a one-truck operation in Scarborough, while Suzanne's mother and I were living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Etobicoke and putting every spare dollar back into the business. About the contracts we'd lost and won. About the Saturday mornings, Suzanne and I used to drive around the industrial parks in the East End so I could check on job sites, and she'd fall asleep in the passenger seat with her face against the window. He listened. He didn't interrupt. I'm not offering you a job, I said when I finished. I want you to understand that. I know, he said. I wouldn't accept one. Good. He looked at the table. I want to earn back whatever trust is still available, not because of the company, just because she loves you, and I've spent too many years not understanding why that should matter to me. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I told him there was a project management firm in Hamilton that was looking for someone with financial analysis experience, and that I happened to know the principal there was a fair man who cared about the work more than the performance of it. I told him it was entry-level relative to where he'd been. I told him it was real. He said he'd look into it. That evening, after Kevin had gone, Suzanne stayed for dinner. We made pasta. She overcooked the noodles because she always has, since she was 12, and I've never once said anything about it because some things are not worth fixing. We ate at the kitchen table with the window cracked, even though it was still cold, the way I always like it in spring, and we talked about her mother, about old holidays in Muskoka, about the summer we drove to Cape Breton in the Silverado when she was 15, and we both pretended it wasn't the cheapest option because it was also the best one. Before she left, she stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the house the way you look at a place when you're remembering what it is to you. "I'm glad it's in a trust," she said. "I know." She hugged me. A real one, both arms, the way she did when she was small. "I don't want anything from you, Dad," she said into my shoulder. "I just want Sundays." "I'll be here every Sunday," I told her. "You know where to find me." After she drove away, I stood on the porch for a while in my jacket, looking out at the street. The maple in the front yard was just starting to bud. I planted that tree the year Suzanne was born. My wife chose the spot. She always had a better eye for where things should go than I did. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen clearly. I spent 14 years making sure I wasn't. And somewhere in that time I made the mistake of thinking that was the same as protecting the people I loved. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But Suzanne knows now, the whole of it. And she came back for pasta and overcooked noodles and Sunday mornings, not for the company or the trust or any of the things that were never hers to begin with. That's worth more than any of it. I've been sitting with this for a while now. And the thing that stays with me isn't the dinner party or the documents or the look on Douglas's face when the numbers didn't match his assumptions. What stays with me is the maple tree in the front yard. The one my wife chose the spot for. I planted it the year Suzanne was born, and I've watched it every spring since. And it occurs to me now that a tree doesn't grow because someone's watching it. It grows because the conditions are right, and because enough time passed, and because nothing stopped it. That's more or less how I think about what happened. Kevin wasn't a bad man. I want to be honest about that. He was a man who had learned to measure the world in visible things, cars, titles, square footage, the right restaurants, and somewhere in that habit of measuring he'd looked at me and gotten the calculation completely wrong. The consequences that came weren't punishment in any dramatic sense. They were just the natural result of building your understanding of a situation on false information. When the real information arrived, everything he'd constructed on top of the false version had to come down. That's not fate. That's just how things work. What I keep thinking about is character, not the performance of it, not the blazer at the anniversary dinner or the carefully chosen words about family stewardship, but the actual thing underneath. The willingness to act with integrity when no one's checking. I spent 14 years driving a rusted Silverado and buying my work boots at Mark's, not because I was hiding something shameful, but because I genuinely didn't see the point of anything else. The work mattered. The people depending on me mattered. What the car looked like in the parking lot did not. That's a value, and values either hold under pressure or they don't. Kevin's didn't for a while, but I watched him sit across from me at my kitchen table and say something true without any angle in it, and I think that was the beginning of him finding his. The harder thing, the thing I didn't expect, was how much this asked of Suzanne. She's a smart woman. She always has been, but intelligence without the honesty to use it on yourself is just a sharper tool for building the wrong thing. What she had to reckon with wasn't Kevin's behavior, but her own willingness to look away from things that didn't fit the life she wanted. That kind of reckoning takes courage, the quiet kind that nobody applauds. She did it anyway. That matters more to me than any of the rest of it. And then there's what I've had to sit with about myself. I kept the truth from my daughter for 14 years because I told myself I was protecting her independence, letting her build her own life without the shadow of my money changing how she saw herself. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was also a way of avoiding the harder conversation. Maybe I could have trusted her with the whole picture long before any of this happened. I'm not sure I got that part right, and I'm honest enough with myself to say so. What I know is this: the people in your life will form an opinion of you. Some of those opinions will be wrong. The question is never whether you can force them to see clearly. You can't, not really, not by explaining yourself. The question is whether you've lived in a way that the truth, when it arrives, speaks for itself. The maple's got new leaves on it this week. My wife would have said that right on time.